Listen, Christ is risen. And we are covering pages 119 and 120 in our notebook. And we're studying Ezra 4. And then next week we will go to Ezra 7. So this week you need to read 5 and 6 because 4, 5, and 6 because we've already studied 5 and 6. So people ask me, why did we skip chapter 4? And I'm going to show you today why we skipped chapter 4, because a major part of that chapter is out of chronological order. And so we're going to figure that one out today. So if you would, look at page 117 in your notes. And if you don't have that, this is what it looks like. It's a list of the kings of Persia. So we have studied Cyrus, king of Persia. He was the first king, and he is the one who allowed the Jews to return home to Judah. He was the one who made the great decree that they could return home. Someday I might write a book, but I don't know. I don't have a lot of time, but I might write a book on the kings of Persia and the decrees they made way, way, way back when, and they were not believers, but yet God used them in a sovereign way in His plan for Israel. And it's kind of hot in here, Lyndon. It's very hot. So Cyrus is the first king that we have studied. Cambyses was his son. We didn't study him because he had no impact on the Jews. Then we looked at Darius the first. He was the one who started the war with Greece, soundly defeated at the Battle of Marathon. And we know that he made a decree for the Jews because the Samaritans, their enemies, were really oppressing them. And Darius said, leave the Jews alone. Let the Jews rebuild the temple and you stay out of there. And furthermore, he said, I want you to pay for their expenses. What a great thing God did, and how fun that was. And then we meet Xerxes. He was the son of Darius. Yes, son of Darius. He was the one who was married to Queen Esther. He was the one who was convinced by the evil man Haman to issue a decree against the Jews to kill them. You see why God put all of these kings in the Bible? We just didn't really know all of that. So someone tell me when we are to read Esther in chronological order. When you're reading Ezra, when do you stop reading Ezra and go to Esther?
After Ezra 6.
Very good, Timothy. You get a star. If you could hug yourself, that's what I tell my second graders to do.
Send the star in the mail.
Star in the mail. All right. So you read the book of Esther between Ezra 6 and 7. That way you understand the chronology. That's when we meet Xerxes, the king. He was the one who was soundly defeated by the Greeks as well. How many of you were here last Sunday to hear Pastor Rob's sermon on the book of Esther? He did a great job, didn't he? Yes, Doug?
Was I right on or was I right on?
I'm sorry?
Was I right on when I told you last week?
You were right on, Doug. I was really thrilled to hear Robbie do that. Did I see somebody else's hand? He told a few things that I didn't know, and I saw how much he had really studied to get all of that done. It took me 5 hours. He did it in 20 minutes. So, but like we told each other, Doug, if I hadn't taken 5 hours, we wouldn't have appreciated all that, would we? But that's Xerxes. Then we're going to meet Artazerxes today. And he is a very important king. He issued 2 decrees that have impacted the Jews for forever. And so we're going to study one of his decrees today. Then the rest of those kings, all the way down to Darius III, none of them had anything to do with the king with Judah in the Bible. no decrees from them. And this is between the testaments. They all lived between the Old and the New Testament. In fact, the last king of Persia was Darius III. He was defeated in 330 BC by Alexander the Great. And then we don't hear any more about the Persians. We hear about the Greeks. And we might cover a little bit of that next week. We'll go back to Artazerxes, and you know the war that Darius started with Greece. His son Xerxes continued the war. It was Artaxerxes who made a treaty with Greece, and there was no more war. And that is exactly when Greece began to experience what we call their classical era. When they had all the scientists, all the philosophers, the great art, the architecture. But I'll show you that in a few weeks. I just wanted to give you an idea of Artaxerxes. So let's go now to Ezra 4. And I'm going to show you where we are in the book. And then we will go look at Artaxerxes. So let's look at Ezra 4, 1 through 5. When we read Ezra 4, 1 through 5, we are reading about the Samaritans who are oppressing and really persecuting and intimidating the Jews and wouldn't allow them to finish their temple. And so look what happened. The enemies of Judah. And who were the enemies of Judah? I just said it. Who are they? Samaritans. The Samaritans. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles, who were the exiles? The Israelites. That's right. Were building a temple for the Lord. And who told them to build that temple?
Cyrus.
King Cyrus, the God of Israel. They, meaning the enemies, set out to discourage the people of Judah and made them afraid to go on building. They bribed officials to work hard against them and frustrate their plans during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia. The entire time that Cyrus was reigning, these Samaritans were doing these things, frustrating the Jews, working against them, and making them afraid. During the entire reign of King Cyrus. And that went down to the reign of Darius. So all the way down to his sons, to Cambyses, the son of Cyrus, down to the reign of the third king, Darius, king of Persia. All right? So what's happening in this context? We are seeing the Samaritans frustrating the plans of the Jews. It's just exactly when God has a plan for our church, a plan for our nation. Satan is going to do everything he can to frustrate God's people, to make them fearful. And that's exactly what's happening in Judah at this time. Look at now we're going to skip verses 1 through, we're going to go to verse 5. Now we're going to skip all the way down to verse 24. All right? Thus, the work on the house of God in Jerusalem came to a standstill until the second year of the reign of King Darius. So it makes it 16 years. If you look at your calendar, at your list of kings, you will find that it's 16 years that they just quit building. What happened to cause them to come back and rebuild the temple? Ezra 5, 1 and 2. Look at that. Ezra 5, 1 and 2, the next two verses, tells us that the prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, came into Judah and prophesied to them and said, rebuild the temple. And that's why we studied Haggai and Zechariah right there. Now, so that is verses 1 through 5 and 23. It's in reference to the Samaritans frustrating the Jews in building what? The temple. Now we're going to read verses 6 through 23. We put those verses in what? Parentheses. We're going to put them in parentheses because this is a parenthetical passage. The writer is going to tell us that there was similar oppression, similar frustration by the enemies of the Jews, not in rebuilding the temple, but in rebuilding the city. And when I used to read this, I would get so confused because I was trying to keep it in chronological order. He picks those verses and he takes them out of chronology out of the chronological order, and he talks about 2 future kings. So we're going to read that now, okay? So let's go to, we are going to understand this when we read verses 6 through 23. They're a parenthetical passage. It's going to interrupt the entire story of rebuilding the temple. You need to understand that. It interrupts the story of rebuilding the temple. They interrupt the flow of the account of the Samaritan opposition to the rebuilding of the temple. That's what you have to understand when you read those verses. The second thing we must understand, they are to be read as an explanation of similar Samaritan opposition during the reign of 2 later kings. You see how this can just really mess you up if you don't know to put those words in parentheses. When you read a parenthetical passage, you don't even have to read it in the context. You can pick it up and read it later because it's an explanation of something or new information. So who are the 2 later kings that we are being introduced here? Xerxes, the husband of Esther, and Artazerxes, the next king. He is the stepson of Esther. They think Artaxerxes may have been the wife of Xerxes that he banned from the temple, Vashti. They think that Artaxerxes may have been her son, but we don't think it was Esther's son. Okay, so we have to understand when we read this passage that we are not reading about the temple. We are reading about 2 future kings, and the opposition is toward the rebuilding of Jerusalem, not the temple. So that's how you're going to keep from getting confused when you read those verses. Got to understand those 3 things. Now, after they built the temple, the Jews didn't just sit around. Jerusalem had been destroyed by Babylon, right? So they needed to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. They needed to repopulate it. People weren't living there. It was destroyed. And so after the temple was built, then they put their energy and their money into rebuilding the city. They had to rebuild the foundations of the walls. They had to put up the walls. They had to rebuild the gates because they'd all been burned. They had to start building houses. It was a mess. So this is what they were doing. So we are first introduced in this passage to a king named Xerxes. All right? So by the time King Xerxes and Queen Esther were married, the temple had been already built and been in existence for at least 30 years. By the time Esther comes into the story, it was 40 years. So this is the context here. So let's look at our notes on page 119, Roman numeral 3. Ezra 4, 6 through 23. And this is what I want you to really understand as you read this. It's opposition to rebuilding the foundation and the city walls of what? Jerusalem, the city. And it involves 2 future kings, Xerxes and Artaxerxes. Letter A. These verses are a section unto themselves. So we put them in parentheses. That's right. The verses interrupt the flow of the account of rebuilding the temple and instead focus on the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the city. And number 2, these verses, this parenthetical passage, gives additional information to the chronicle of the Samaritan opposition. Can you see why the Jews in the New Testament hated the Samaritans? I mean, look what they were doing, and the Jews knew their history, and they knew how the Samaritans had mistreated them.
Is that why Jesus at the well, the woman said, "But I'm a Samaritan.
Yeah.
You want anything to do with me?"
Absolutely. That's why he used the Good Samaritan as a wonderful example of who your neighbor is. It's everybody. Yes, Timothy. Thank you, Kathy. Tim?
I did some checking and it said that Darius II was the son of Esther.
Okay. All right. I'll take that.
And they carried it on into, he was the one who wanted the temple rebuilt, and Artazerxes was the stepson.
Okay.
That's what I read. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Well, we don't have to agree. I don't know. I'm just yeah.
When I read,
Right. That's good.
When I looked up, I don't know
Okay.
if it's right or not.
Yeah. Thank you, though. Yeah, I know. I don't know how to. I know. Scholars don't have to agree on these kinds of things, and I'm certainly glad. So he's talking about who Darius the second. No. Which one are you talking about?
Darius II was...
Okay, I haven't even gotten to Darius the second, have I? So on page 117, wherever that is, look and see where Darius the second is. Oh, he's way down there. Okay. All right. Yeah, but we're talking about Xerxes the first. We're doing Xerxes the first. Now, where was I? Okay. That's all right.
I got you off.
Okie dokie. Let's go back. Where was I?
You were talking about number
3. Oh, yes, they give additional information of the Samaritan opposition, but it's opposition to the work of rebuilding the city of what? Jerusalem, not the temple. Number 3, these verses fast forward us to another time. They fast forward us to future kings, the two future kings of Xerxes the first and Artaxerxes the first. And number 4, the temple. Now this is important for you to remember. The temple had been completed. Does anybody remember what year it was completed? 516. 516 BC, exactly 70 years after it was destroyed in 586. And it was completed, and that began the Second Temple period, which lasted until 70 AD when it was destroyed by the Romans. That was the Second Temple period. But this temple, Second Temple, had been completed in 516 and at least 30 years before King Xerxes.
Is that the 70 years of exile?
Well, that's a good point, too. Doug says, does that mean the 70 years of exile? We can take the 70 years and interpret it many ways. But I think the best one is that Jeremiah said that they would be exiled for 70 years in Babylon. Many people stayed there, okay? But I think one of the best ways to interpret that is they were in exile because they had no temple, a spiritual exile. So you can take it that way. Okay? Thank you. All righty. Okay. We got number 1 through 4. Now we're going to meet King Xerxes in the scriptures. This is verse 6, the first verse of the parenthetical passage. We meet King Xerxes. Ahasuerus was his Hebrew name. Other scholars say that Ahasuerus was a common title for a Persian king. They were all called Ahasuerus. But most scholars, I think, say that that was his Hebrew name. So here's Ezra chapter 4, verse 6, the first verse in the passage. At the beginning of the reign of Xerxes. So underline that in your book, in your Bible, because you got to know this is the future king. They, the Samaritans, lodged an accusation against the people of Judah and Jerusalem. Now, it's in the beginning of his reign. So that was when he was going over to Greece and fighting over there and getting soundly defeated. That's when he divorced his wife Vashti. And that is when the Samaritans wrote him a letter accusing the Jews of rebuilding the city. And so they against the people. It was the first year of his reign, which was 486. Did you get some papers, Amy? Okay. There is no indication anywhere in secular history or in biblical history that Xerxes responded to this accusation. There's nothing. And because we meet him in his first years of his reign, but there's nothing about him doing anything about this accusation. Therefore, since God didn't have it put in the Bible, I can assume that is so, can't we? So there's no indication he took any action. But what other interaction or what other action did Xerxes take against the Jews? This is the wife of the husband of Esther. What did he do? What?
He saved them from being slaughtered by...
Okay, he saved them, but there was something he did before he saved them. He condemned them. He condemned them to destruction, to murder, to genocide. He made a decree to kill every Jew in Persia, which included the nation of Judah, province of Judah. And then later that year, he made another decree. He couldn't nullify that first decree. What he did was that he added to it, and he said, but we're going to give the Jews the opportunity to defend themselves and to protect their property. That was 2 decrees that he made. So, but as far as the city of Jerusalem, in this passage, we don't see Xerxes making any kind of statement even to it. So Esther 4 through 8 is when he was the husband of Esther. Now, let's see if we can do letter B. Ready? Xerxes the first. Now, this is his years of reign. So we see that he reigned about 20 years. It's hot in here, honey. Oh. His Hebrew name, we say, was what? What was his Hebrew name? Ahasuerus. Or it could have been a Persian title, but it is a Hebrew word. And he was married to whom?
Esther.
Queen Esther. Now this is that Xerxes in verse 6. There we go. That's what I wonder right there. Okay. The Samaritans in verse 6 lodged an accusation against the Jews during the first year of Xerxes' reign, 486. All righty? Whew, my hair is just going to fall flat in about 1 second. Golly. Is it working? I'm going to... I got to get some air. Somebody bring me a fan. Quickly, I need a fan. I need a piece of paper. Okay, I'll tear up some of my paper. Whew. Thank you. Okay, stay right there. I'll give it back to you. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I just need some air. This will be cute on YouTube, won't it? They'll know I'm a real woman.
Good?
I hope so. Man, I'm sorry. I need some air. Is it on? Can you feel some air over there? Okay, it'll cool off then. Woo! All right. No, I'm all right. Thank you. I'm all right. Oh, yeah, I can feel a little air now. Man, don't ever do that to me because... All right, where was I?
Passed out.
Well, it's worse than passing out. My hair is going to go flat. You know. Right. Thank you, Drusilla. What was I doing? All right. Number 2 under letter B. All righty. In his first year in 474 BC, King Xerxes, at the persuasion of the evil what? Haman, issued a decree to destroy who? Every Jew throughout the Persian Empire, including Judah. Somebody asked me one time, I thought it was a great question. Well, if it's throughout the Persian Empire, why didn't all these Jews just run to Israel? Well, because it was part of the Persian Empire. It was a province. It was under the control of Persia. So all the Jews in Judah would have been killed as well. Letter A, we learned that this spirit of persecution of the Jews goes back to this man named Amalek. Now, if you missed all those lessons, you really got to find out where they were because it was a great study. It's on YouTube. That anti-Semitism back then and today is known as the spirit of Amalek. Okay? Right here. So Esther interceded, and therefore Xerxes issued a second decree to allow the Jews to defend themselves and their property. That's Xerxes. Do you feel okay with that verse? If you've not been here before, David and Suzette, it may be a little overwhelming, but hang in here. Okay. Now then, that's when they had Purim as well. Now then, let's look at King Artaxerxes. He's the next verse. So this passage only mentions Xerxes in one verse. And now we're going to learn about Artaxerxes. Listen carefully. You will meet him when you go into Ezra 7. And then all the way through Ezra 7 through 10. And you will know him as the king in the book of Nehemiah. This is the king of when we meet Ezra in chapter 7. And he is the king for whom for whom Nehemiah worked. What do we know about Artaxerxes from the Bible? Well, prior to his reign, his predecessors, there were 4 kings, but we only mentioned 3. Do you know who the first one was? Come on, I just told you. Who was the first king? Cyrus. Who was the next king? Darius. And who was the next one? Xerxes. See, you're learning your kings of Persia. Who ever thought you'd learn that, right? But it's so important because God thought it was important enough to write 2 books about this. And Haggai, really 4 books. Really 4. Haggai and Zechariah as well. And Xerxes. You'll find that on page 117. Guess what? I am cool. I can feel it. You guys will probably freeze out and you may have to move. Okay. Number 2. Almost 70 years have passed since the first group of exiles left Babylon and went home to Jerusalem. Their leader was Zerubbabel. You will read about that whole event in Ezra 1, 2, and 3. The temple had been completed now, at the time of Artaxerxes, 41 years. Now, when you read the Bible, you just don't realize how they compact history in years. So we have 41 years that the temple has been built at the time of Artaxerxes' first reign. The people of Judah were now repairing the foundation and rebuilding the walls of the city of Jerusalem. And what the Samaritans are going to accuse them of is that they are making a fortified city. And they were. They were making a city with walls around it. And that's how they protected their cities in those days. And they wanted to protect the temple from destruction. So that was why they were building this wall. So let's look at Roman numeral 4 at the bottom. Verses 7 through 23, we meet this second king. And his name is Artaxerxes. What do we know about him? Number 1, now this is from the Bible, and I'm going to share a whole lot of good stuff from the secular history next week, I think. But we do know that his predecessors were whom? Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes. That's important to know those. Number 2, how many years have passed since Zerubbabel led the first group of exiles back? At least 75 years. So that's fun for me to know. Number 3, the temple had been completed how many years earlier? How many? 41. And you will figure that out by taking 516 BC, that's when it was completed, and subtract the first year of Artaxerxes. So you see the numbers getting smaller because we're getting closer to Christ, to 0. All right, number 4, 465 BC, the people were working hard on rebuilding the foundation and walls of the city of what? Okay, so now you understand what we're doing, don't you? Now then, let's look at verse 7. So the enemies of the Jews, the Samaritans, are going to file a vindictive and critical report, just like they did to Xerxes, and he didn't pay attention to it, Now they're sending another letter 20 years later to Artazerxes, thinking that maybe he will pay attention to the concerns that the Samaritans had. They warned Artazerxes of the consequences to him if he allowed the Jews to rebuild the city. So let's see what that is. This is verse 7. And in the days of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, here are the leaders of the Samaritans now. Ready? Bislam. You don't have to remember this. Mithridath, Tabeel. And we don't name our kids those names, do we? These are not Jewish names. That's why we don't use them. And the rest of his associates wrote a letter to Artaxerxes. This is verse 7 of chapter 4. The letter was written in Aramaic script and in the Aramaic language. Why? Because Aramaic at that time, beginning in the time of Babylon, was the international language. So Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and all of those people taken into exile had to learn Aramaic. That became the language of the whole Babylonian Empire. It continued into the Persian Empire. It was the language of diplomacy, and it was the language of commerce. Kind of like English today, isn't it? It's a international language. Now, verse 8. Rehum, this is the other people who are signing on to this letter. So these are important people. The commanding officer and Shimshai the secretary wrote a letter against what? Jerusalem. You see why they're putting this in a parenthesis? Because it's not about the temple, it's about Jerusalem. To Artaxerxes with the king as follows. Here it is. This letter, they're saying, is from Rehum. So now we've got to do it again. From Rehum, the commanding officer, Shimshai the secretary, together with the rest of their associates. Now look at all the people signing on to this letter. The judges, the officials, and administrators over the people from Persia, Uruk, Babylon, and the Elamites of Susa. All over are agreeing with them. And the other people, whom the great and honorable Ashurbanipal deported. You want to know what that's talking about? 2 Kings 17. When Assyria came in, I talked about this. Assyria came in, destroyed Israel, deported all the people, and brought pagans into Samaria. That's where we get the Samaritans. And so all the people whom that king from Assyria brought in, worshiping other gods, are now writing a letter of slander, of libel against the Jews. And let's see what they said. Okay, the term. He said they settled in the Samaria and in the Trans-Euphrates. And I just want you to see what the Trans-Euphrates means. Here is a map of Jerusalem. And when it says Trans-Euphrates. So here is the Euphrates River, right here. And here is the Tigris River. They're still there today. And this is where Babylon is located, and Iraq. And if you are Trans-Euphrates and you're living in Susa and you are across the river, trans means across. Okay, so all the words that you know that start with trans means across or cross. And so they were over here in Susa. So if you're Trans-Euphrates, you're looking east to Jerusalem. Okay? But if you're in Jerusalem and you look across the Euphrates, which direction are you going? Did I give the wrong direction? Did I say west? Did I say west? Okay, I always do that. If you look this way and you go this way, you're looking west. But if you're living in Jerusalem and you're looking across the Euphrates, what direction are you going? East. So that is depending on your perspective, isn't it? And so they're saying that this is regarding the people Trans-Euphrates. Now here's their letter. To King Artaxerxes, from your servants where? Trans-Euphrates, all those people west of the river. The king should know that the people who came up to us from you, so all those exiles coming back, have gone to Jerusalem and are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. Yeah. They are restoring the walls and repairing the foundations. Furthermore, the king should know that if this city is built and its walls are restored, no more taxes, no more tribute, no more duty will be paid. Let's look at those words. Taxes. Taxes are what people pay domestically. You pay it on your groceries, on your purchases, on your land, on your businesses. Anything you purchase or sell, you pay taxes, don't you? Tribute in this time, and still is a payment generally of blackmail. And a nation will pay tribute to a king from another country to keep that king from attacking them. Well, even the United States even does that, don't we? I mean, we pay other countries, we pay a lot of countries, particularly in the Middle East, to stay down, right? And so that's called tribute, if you wanted to call it that. And then there is the duty. The duty is what you would pay on international trade and purchases. The same thing we have today, isn't it? So that's what he was saying. No more taxes, no more tribute or duty will be paid, and eventually the royal revenues will suffer. So let's look now at page 119. Let's see. Yeah, 119, letter B at the bottom. The Samaritans again filed a vindictive letter. How many have they written now? They wrote one to Darius, and it backfired on him. They wrote one to Xerxes, and he didn't respond. And now they're writing one to Artazerxes. And they filed this letter. It is pretty vindictive, isn't it? Against the Jews of Jerusalem, but this time to King who? Artaxerxes. And that's the one that Nehemiah served as a cupbearer for. Claiming the following. Number one, Jerusalem had what kind of a past? Rebellious and wicked. And that's true. If you read the book of Jeremiah, you will see that that's true. Number two, Jerusalem will stop paying what? Taxes, tribute, and duty. Now, Amy, did you learn those words, what tribute and taxes and duty are in your classes at school? You didn't? Okay. Well, now you know. All right. Good. I'm glad you're here, Precious. Are you writing your notes down?
Yeah, we're sharing a pen.
Well, here. Here. I was going to throw it, but I think it's safer you do come get it. Thank you, baby.
The teacher can't throw pencils.
Yeah, I can't throw. All right. But I'm cool now. Are y'all freezing? It's kind of cold in here, I'm sorry to say. I know.
It's okay.
All right. So they've written this letter, and here's what they're going to ask the king to do. He has to wear a parka to bed. He wears a winter parka.
I have to do that too with Vicky. She freezes me to death.
Now, they say, since we are under obligation to the palace, and it is not proper for us to see the king dishonored. What are they doing here? I'm saying they're being obsequious. You know what that word means, Amy? Okay. It means brown-nosing.
Being political.
Yeah, being political, that's right. They know who pays their salary. The king does, doesn't he? Out of the royal treasury. And if we let Jerusalem be rebuilt, we're not going to have all that money. You can't pay us, and that won't be good. So you can see why they're doing this. So we're just because it's our job. Therefore, we're sending you this message, oh, your majesty. So that, here's what they want him to do. A search may be made in the archives of your predecessors. Who else has done that? The Samaritans asked King Darius to search the archives to find Cyrus's letter that says the Jews should build the temple. Did he find it?
Yes.
Yes. Did he say, quit building the temple? No. He said, you Samaritans, stay away from the Jews, stay away from the building site, leave them alone and give them some money to pay their expenses. It backfired. You would have thought they'd known their history, right? Because there's no reason that Artaxerxes won't do the same thing. Do you know what he did? Anybody know? All right. Well, I'm glad you came to Sunday school today. Would you like to know what he did? Okay. In these records you will find, in the archives, that this city, Jerusalem, is a rebellious city. It's troublesome to kings and provinces. Absolutely true. It was a place with a long history of sedition. That is why this city was destroyed. That's why Jerusalem was destroyed. We inform you, your majesty, that if this city is built and its walls are restored, you, the king, will be threatened. It will be a threat to you, the king. It will be a threat to your empire. It will mean that you are left with nothing in Trans-Euphrates. Wow, that's just a little bitty town. And it goes all the way over to the river. I don't know that that's absolutely true. Do you? Okay. So here's what they did. The Samaritans file a vindictive report to the king of Persia. It claims these things. Jerusalem is a wicked city. Well, God said it was too, didn't he? Why? Because of their rebellion against him. They were worshiping other idols. And it was rebellious against Babylon. So it was a wicked city, even though it's God's city. And they said, Jerusalem will stop paying taxes. We don't know that that's true. Jerusalem is troublesome to kings and provinces. That's true. Jerusalem has a long history of revolt and sedition. I don't know that that's totally true. Do you? Jerusalem is a threat to royal interests. I don't know. Anyway, that's what they said. So, let's look at page 120, numbers 3, 4, and 5. Number 3 at the top. Jerusalem had been what, according to these people? Rebellious and wicked. Jerusalem, number 4, was what? No. It was defeated, destroyed. The reason that Jerusalem is in such a destructive state is that Jerusalem was destroyed precisely, according to them, because of its history of, what they say, this city was destroyed precisely because it was rebellious and troublesome and seditious. You can use any one of those words, or 2 or 3. And then they said in number 5, in effect, if Jerusalem is rebuilt, it will be a what? A threat to royal interests. Isn't this interesting? You know, when you know that this is a example of the right thing. Okay, here's some more examples of the Samaritan oppression. Now then, let's look at verse 15 and 16. We're going to see what they requested. He searched the archives, and they said, when you do, you're going to see we are telling the truth. So let's read verses 15 and 16. The Samaritans requested that the king search the archives, for in them he would find out about the rebellious past of this sinful city. That is a rather tough, not too true, just enough truth in it to make the king sit up and listen. All right, so let's see. Letter C. They requested the king to do what?
Look in the archives.
Search the archives, because they assured him he would find out about Jerusalem's rebellious past. So what's the king going to say? Now, I told all of you to go home and read this chapter. Anybody remember? I know all of you went home and read it. What did he do? Oh, goody. Let's find out. The king sent this reply to Rehum, He sent it to Rehum, and he sent it to Shimshai, and the rest of their associates living in Samaria, and elsewhere in Trans-Euphrates. So all the people everywhere were concerned about this. And he said, greetings. He said, the letter you sent us has been read and translated in my presence. Well, if it was written in Aramaic, they probably translated it into what? Persian. Okay, because he was speaking Persian. I issued, verse 29, did I leave anything out? Yeah, okay. I issued an order, and a search was made. So he's searching the archives, and it was found that this city does have a long history of revolt against kings, and has been a place of rebellion and sedition. Jerusalem has had powerful kings ruling over the whole of Trans-Euphrates. So he went all the way back to the time of Solomon, because Solomon did control a whole part of that area between the Euphrates River and the Mediterranean Sea. So they went all the way back there. And taxes, tribute, and duty were actually paid to them. Now, therefore, so he sees a threat, doesn't he? Therefore, he says, issue an order to these men to do what? To do what? Stop work. Stop rebuilding the city, so that this city will not rebuild until I so order. This is a sad story. Did y'all know this was happening in Jerusalem in our church history? In our legacy of the Jews being the parent of Christianity? We didn't know all this, did we? Be careful. Don't neglect this matter. Well, I bet they didn't, right? I mean, they were, all of them, against the rebuilding of this city. And so he said, don't neglect the matter. Why let this threat grow to the detriment of the royal interests? And so let's look at letter D, numbers 1 through 3. Here's the king's findings and his recommendations. Verse 19, he searched the archives, and he found that Jerusalem truly did have a sinful and tragic past. Verse 20, he found that the Israelite kings had indeed ruled over the region beyond the river, what? Euphrates. And that they had received what? Taxes, tribute, and duty. And now you know what those mean. And if you want to read more about it, look at 2 Samuel and 1 Kings. You will find that those kings who ruled over the Trans-Euphrates. Number 3, the letter from, who were their adversaries?
Jewish Samaritans.
The Samaritan adversaries. The letter from the Samaritan adversaries was successful. It didn't backfire on them like it did under King Darius. Artaxerxes, king of what? Persia, perhaps the most powerful man in the world at that time, decreed that the work on the city of Jerusalem must be stopped until he, the king, gave further notice. So how do you think the Samaritans felt? Happy? Sad? I mean happy? Rejoiced that they got their way and that the Jews would have to stop. How did the Jews feel? Cheated, yes. And oh my goodness, that's why they were back, to rebuild their city. How depressed they would be. Verse 23, let's see what it says. As soon as the copy of the letter of King Artaxerxes was read to Rehum and Shimshai and their associates, they went immediately to the Jews in Jerusalem. What did they say? Stop. And compelled them by force to stop. They used military arms to make them stop. So they forced them to stop. So that's letter D, number 4 and 5. Let's look at we've done 1 and 2 and 3. Let's do number 4. The adversaries made the most of the decree and by force made the Jews what? Stop the work immediately. Now here is something that is so interesting. And this is, once I figured out how to put this passage in parentheses, I understood that chapter. But here's what historians say. That the Jews had been working now for many years on Jerusalem, hadn't they? Rebuilding the walls and rebuilding the foundation, rebuilding the gates. So they had done a lot of work. The Persians went in there with the Samaritans and destroyed everything that they had done. And so that when Nehemiah went back into Judah and into Jerusalem, and he saw the city and its destruction and how ravaged the people were in living in this destroyed city, it made him really sad. And that's in Nehemiah 1. You really ought to go read Nehemiah 1. And you will see the condition of the city of Jerusalem. And it wasn't the Babylonians who did it. They'd already destroyed it, and the Jews were rebuilding it. The Persians now have destroyed the city of Jerusalem and all of their work. So that's letter E. It is likely that at the end of verse 23, the Persians actually what? Destroyed the work. And put Samaritans as well, because they were thrilled to help the Persians destroy this. The Jews had already completed in rebuilding Jerusalem since 538. So we know that this is, let's see, how many years was this? 465 minus 538 minus 465 is close to 80-some years, isn't it? So for 80 years they'd been building on it, and the Persians destroyed it. Now let's look at number 1 real quickly. There's the city of Jerusalem when Nehemiah, some years later, sent his Jews back to Jerusalem to check on the people. And this is what he found. Now close the parentheses at the end of verse 23. Everybody has done that, right? In your Bible? You close the parentheses. The prepositional phrase passage was about 2 future kings. What was their name? That's right, Xerxes and Artazerxes. It was in reference to what? The rebuilding what? The city, not the temple. It was not about rebuilding the temple. And now we get to verse 24 of chapter 4. And so once you close that parenthesis, verse 24, careful now, verse 24 jumps all the way back to verse 25. All right? So you read 1 through 5 and 24, all about the temple. The intermediate passage is about the city. So if you know that, this chapter makes so much more sense. It's to the rebuilding of the temple. We revert to the reign of King Darius, going all the way back. We revert to the civil leadership of the governor Zerubbabel, and we revert to the spiritual leadership of Joshua the high priest and the temple prophets Haggai and Zechariah. Is that not fascinating? But you've got to, in order to appreciate this lesson, you must go back and read chapter 4 and 5 and 6. It will all make sense. Terry?
I don't know, as I'm listening to you, are we going through the same thing now as Christians that they went through, as far as we have to accept everybody else's philosophy, Christians are ridiculed, you know, are we kind of going through the same thing?
Terry is asking, are we seeing similar life today? I don't think Satan changes, do you? Satan does all of he can do. He is very, very busy. He does not waste time in destroying God's work if he can. Yes, exactly. We're seeing that. Let's look quickly at 120 letter F, okay? We close. Tell me you understand this. Are y'all with me on this? All right, did I lose it? Wait. Okay.
How about E1?
Who?
The 20 years before King Artazerxes decreed that the blank should be rebuilt. The temple? It's likely that the Persians actually, it was 20 years before King decreed that the city should be rebuilt.
then number 2.
Am I confused here? I think.
Who did he put in charge?
Am I confused here? I'm going to have to go back and find that.
You skipped
What?
to
It was 20 years. Oh yeah, verse.
E1.
Yes. This decree. Well, oh yeah, that's right. Okay, the key to the key to that number 1 is that the city should be rebuilt. It was 20 years. Here we go. Number 1. This decree was in effect for 20 years. And he said, don't rebuild it until I say so, right? So 20 years went by, and we read in Nehemiah 2 that Artaxerxes decreed now that the city should be rebuilt.
Who did he put in charge of it?
Nehemiah. And he put Nehemiah in charge of it and sent him home. I don't want you to ever forget that decree. Circle Nehemiah 2, 7, and 8. Highlight it. Put a square around it. Underline it. Bold print it. That is one of the most important verses in the Bible, Old Testament. Okay? But I'm not going to tell you what it is. Now you can read chapters 4 and 5 and 6 with understanding. Okay, let's do okay, quickly, I've got to hurry. He put Nehemiah in charge of rebuilding the city, but that's lessons we're going to do later. Just wanted you to know that's how that works. Remember, the work of rebuilding the temple had ceased for 16 years. Verse 24 reverts to the narrative of verses 1 through 5 regarding building the temple. Letter B, concerning King Darius in his 2nd year. Letter C, concerning the civil leadership of Governor Zerubbabel and the spiritual leadership of Joshua the high priest and the temple prophets. What were their names? Haggai and Zechariah. All right, we did it. Can you believe what, Brenda?
I didn't get it all. I'm sorry.
What? Tell me the numbers. If you didn't get it, other people didn't either. What do you want me to do? You can turn that off now, Lyndon. What, Brenda?
I go all the way up to 24.
F.
What letter?
F.
24.
Okay, we'll do that. You got letter E, right?
Yeah.
Okay, here's F. We come to verse 24. We now read